Hello, everyone, and welcome to WorldNow. I'm Jim Falk, and today we are with best-selling author and the always popular speaker at many World Affairs Councils, Jonna Mendez. Beginning as a contract wife, Jonna's distinguished undercover journey of almost 3 decades took her across the globe. At the time of her retirement in 1993, she was the chief of disguise at the CIA's Office of Technical Services. Now, this book, In True Face, A Woman's Life in the CIA Unmasked, is both a memoir of a remarkable career, but it's also a hard-hitting discussion of the challenges that women have faced for many, many years at the agency, looking for both equality and respect. Let me read you a quote from the CIA historian and author Tim Weiner. He wrote this in 2018. But he said, apart from the Marines, there is no branch of service in the U.S. government as hostile to women as the clandestine services of the CIA. Now, no doubt, the CIA is very different today. And one reason for that are smart, strong, dedicated professionals like Jonna Mendez. Now, she is the author of now 4 books. Her first 3 books were written with her late husband, Tony Mendez. The Moscow Rules, Spy Dust, and of course, Argo. And before we get started, I know she would want me to tell you, you have to go to the Spy Museum because she's a founding director there. And in fact, Jonna, my granddaughter is going to Washington in a few weeks, and I've told my son, you have to go to the Spy Museum. Welcome. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you again. Good morning.
So I always like to ask authors this question, and that is, when you started the book in True Face, did it take a different direction than you had originally intended?
Well, it absolutely did. It's interesting that's your first question. I started writing this book during COVID. I'd lost Tony. Um, my dog died right at the beginning of COVID. And I was truly alone for the first time in a long time. So I thought, okay, I'll sit down and kind of piece together my story. I started out just as a memoir, more or less to entertain myself. It was entertaining as I kind of went back through my mental files and remembered what was kind of smooth and easy on the surface. And I went back and looked in. No, it was not quite like that. But in the middle, somewhere in the middle of writing this book, I realized that I was echoing things I'd heard from my mother, from other women. There was one point during the book, I walked through my living room and I had Michelle Obama's most recent book, which I was looking at. I just kind of flipped it open and discovered that in 1974, she's talking about how she couldn't take out a loan, she couldn't get a mortgage, she couldn't open a bank account without Barack. And the book just kept broadening a bit into the American workplace, really. My mom spent a career at Boeing. And in fact, I realized that my career was wanting to echo my mother's career, which was rocky. Mama worked in computers at Boeing. She worked with a bunch of men on these big reel-to-reel computers. So Boeing would lose a contract and they'd have a layoff. This is in Wichita, where Boeing was. We were a one industry town. It was airplanes. Boeing would have a layoff. The women would go home. My mom would come home. She'd be home about 6 months. Boeing would get a new contract. Mama would go back to work, but now she's working for the young men she was training when she left. And that was kind of the undulating curve of her career. And that was starting to happen to me at CIA. And I recognized it. I had thought that that's kind of how it was. I didn't really give it thought. Well, now I gave it some thought and realized that we had entered a rocky workplace and we had changed it just by being there.
You know, you talk about how people's positions changed, and I was just amazed about this whole concept of a contract wife and how you were expected to work hard, give loyalty to the agency, and then once your husband was transferred back to Washington, you were back at the very beginning.
And you would keep getting back to the beginning, because if you were a wife here in Washington, D.C., and your husband, say, was at CIA,
Mhm.
He would get a foreign assignment because that's where the work is. You would leave your job, whatever it was, private industry, pardon me, government. You'd leave your job and you'd accompany your husband overseas. The CIA would hire you as a contract wife,
Mhm.
not staff, contract. Your husband, assuming he did a good job, probably get a promotion because going overseas and doing well is how you got promoted. So you come back, your husband's promoted, but you, because you're a contract wife, you go back to the entry level that you started at. You lose any promotions you got overseas, you come back and you start over. And you could keep this, you could just keep repeating this, never actually attaining anything because you lost it when you came home.
A
But I
bad
looked
game of
around,
Monopoly.
we weren't the only ones. State Department had a similar arrangement with their wives. When you were overseas, you were part of the team. You were entertaining officially. If you were CIA, you were part of the team. Maybe you were positioning a car clandestinely. You were doing all kinds of things. You come home though, and you had to start over.
Let me ask you this. You spent a considerable part of your life undercover. And in this book, I really get to understand and appreciate you and hear a lot about your family and a second marriage late in life, a child born, I think let's say, I think it was 47 or so. Was
Also living life.
was it hard for you to sort of take off the veil and tell the world about this?
It was just so interesting. Tony and I would say we were so immersed in our work when we were working. He had lost his first wife, Karen, to lung cancer toward the end of his career. But that's really what we did. We worked late into the evenings. We were training Moscow-bound officers on the streets of Washington, D.C. after work hours. And we used to laugh and say, what would we be doing if we weren't doing this? If we quit, what would life look like as a civilian without this thing we have? And then we both left CIA. We both retired. He picked up his paintbrush and continued painting. That's one of his paintings on the wall behind him. I'm a new mom with this child that I'm actually afraid of because I don't know how to take care of a child. But over time, we came back to espionage. We started teaching at Defense Intelligence Agency. We started teaching for David Majors. He had a CI center. It just kind of began sneaking up on us. Then they were going to build a spy museum, and they had everything they needed for a spy museum. They had $40 million and a whole bunch of artifacts and a piece of property in downtown DC and museum people, professionals, but they didn't have any spies. They didn't know what. So we came in as founding board members of the International Spy Museum, and then it just kept growing. Then Argo happened, and we found that we were kind of back in the spy business without actually being employed by the intelligence community anymore. It was just interesting. Like
So you didn't really have any hesitation then about going public with everything then?
We had never planned to. We had never. That was not on the agenda until Argo. And Argo was never on the agenda. Tony was taking Argo to his grave. He was never going to tell that story. There's a whole bunch of other stories. Argo's just one. He never was going to tell any of them. But the CIA and the guys of George Tenet said we want to tell that story. It was right before 9/11. It was a quiet moment. Pat Moynihan was in the Senate saying, do we really need a central intelligence agency? Things are going kind of swimmingly. Maybe we could just let that go. And George Tenet was like, well, let's tell them then. Let's tell them one good story. Let's tell them the Argo. And he set up an interview, oddly, at the New York Times with Weiner, the man who wrote the beautiful review of my most recent book, In True
Right,
Faith.
Jim, right.
And George Tenet said, go, you have an appointment, go talk to him, tell him the story. And that changed everything because then all our neighbors, we lived outside of DC on 40 acres. It was kind of rural. was beautiful. But nobody out there had any idea what either one of us had ever done. And Tony was a painter. I was a photographer with a little kid. I was a little bit old and all that, you know. Out there, your neighbors would say, so, you know, when they met you, they'd say, where do you work? And you'd say, oh, the answer was, I go down the road. That's all the country people wanted to hear. That meant I go into DC and work for that gigantic government bureaucracy. I go down the road, and they never would inquire further. So
That's a little bit like here in Santa Fe. I'll find out that someone works at the lab and they'll say, I go to the lab, and that's about all I'll ever find out.
you won't pursue it. I mean,
And you
yeah,
don't have to ask.
yeah.
Let me get back to this other part of your book, and that is the tough time that women had. And I love how you open up the book with a quote from Justice Ginsburg. And now I've lost where it was. I will find it in a minute. There it is. Excuse me. I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks. Now, it just happens that I had dinner a few nights ago with a CIA retired couple, and they're in their 60s. And they were talking about, especially the wife, about how she remembers that women would be very, very tough. It was like, you're going to go through what I went through. And I'm not going to give you any slack, and I don't, you know, and I'm wondering, why is it that the CIA has had such a tough time incorporating women into the workforce in an equal manner?
I think the CIA very much mirrored the American workplace. I don't really think it was just the CIA. I think it was women coming out of their kitchens and out of their households and into the public arena. And there were a bunch of men who kind of thought they didn't really belong there, that maybe they should stay at home. But you know, the economy forced the issue, because a lot of couples discovered that it takes two people working to live the way that they wanted to live. So that was happening. At the CIA, there were pieces of it that were not so difficult. It was like Tim Weiner, the journalist, said, the clandestine services, that's the operational element. That's the Directorate of Operations. That's just one piece of the CIA. That's where I was, and that's where I wanted to be. Feet on the ground, overseas, meeting with and supporting agency operations. The other pieces of it, the analytical section, that's another directorate. Women have done rather well there. There are different, there's now a new cyber directorate. I don't know how women are doing there, but I would imagine that they're on a much better footing, because a lot of the young women coming out of school are as cyber educated as their male colleagues. But it was in the operational piece of it was the hardest place to penetrate. They did not want us there. They told us that. They didn't think we could do the work. You know, we hired our operations officers there was a special category, even within CIA. We hired them for their person-to-person capabilities, for their personalities, almost, their ability to connect, their ability to develop a rapport with all kinds of people. Our case officers, if you met one at a party or at some college game, you would just be drawn to them. You'd want to be their friend. The men thought the women couldn't do that. And then they thought, well, in certain parts of the world, as a woman, you have absolutely no value, like the Middle East. You really do have no value. Various parts of the world. And in Moscow, we pretty much knew that the Russians, the KGB, didn't use women in their work, and they assumed we didn't use women in ours.
You talk about some of the skills that women have that are in some ways better developed than men. Could you talk about that?
I believe that women possess a power, a soft power, that men don't necessarily either have or exhibit. A power of truly, on a one-to-one basis, of caring about people and their families and their kids and their welfare and their security you put a woman into that role where she's meeting a foreigner, let's just say a Russian, because that was always one of the toughest places. Maybe we have a Russian coming forward saying, I would like to work with you. I want to work with the West. But you have to know that for me, it is so dangerous. And for my family, it is dangerous. For my children, I am, concerned about all that, but I have information and I want to give it to you. Typically, now the men that I know are going to listen to this and say, oh, that wasn't me. But the men will go in and kind of evaluate the operation and say, you know what you need? You need a secret writing system. You need a photo capability. You need it. And we'll train you in those things. And we'll show you how to do that. Maybe encrypted communications on shortwave radio. And they'll train them in all of that stuff. And then they walk off and kind of leave. The women will train them in all of that stuff. But they won't finish it until they absolutely know that the man has got it. And a woman will say, okay, do you understand what I just said? Yes. Okay, play it back to me. Okay, but you missed this one part. So let's play it back to me again. And the man you're training, and it's always men that you're training. It's always men. We've never had women coming forward being spies with us. The woman won't let him go until he's got it down. And it doesn't embarrass him to tell a woman, I don't understand that. I don't really get that. I'm not sure I can do that. The woman will take him through a training process that ensures when it's done, it'll work. And then she'll stay on top of it. What about your kids? He'll say, maybe one of his kids is sick. What, do you have the right medicine? Can't get that medicine. I'll get that medicine for your boy. He'll say, my girl really loves rock and roll music. The woman will go out and get some CDs and dead drop them to the agent. The women make it becomes personal.
Well, I want to ask you to talk a little bit about a wonderful story in your book. And there's so many where you talk about working with various foreign agents. But I think this one in particular, from what you've just said, really hits the point well. When you were training the Afghan near Reagan Airport, who was so surprised that you were in that position. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was kind of an example. I wasn't using it as an example, but it works. I was in disguise training. I was getting ready to go to the subcontinent, I have to say, and they said we have there's a window here. We have like slightly more than a week. We have a young Mujahideen. He's working with Americans. We need to train him in camera work out in the desert using long lenses. He's on a horse. He's on horseback. Blah blah blah. So I had been a photo operations officer to that point, and I left what I was doing, and I met with him. So I'm looking at this small, slim, very handsome, young man wearing one of those chitali caps like the Afghans would wear. I am there in stilettos and a Dior pantsuit. And that was where we began. So he was interested, he was surprised and interested that he was going to have a female instructor, because in his country, you couldn't really go out without a veil. And here I am.
Sure.
So was I married? I said, well, yes, I am. He said, so how does your husband feel about this? And I said, my husband has nothing to do with this, but he's fine with it. If you want to know, this is what I do. I do this all the time. He said, so you can train me in alone, and we can. I said, we're going to be on the riverbank this whole time. Yes, it's fine. It's fine. And through the week, we kept having more and more of that conversation. He says, you travel by yourself. You get on an airplane, you go somewhere alone. Someone is meeting you at the airplane. No. And he became relaxed, and he understood that we were going to take care of him. He and his uncle were working. We weren't paying them money. We were paying them with medicine, with crates of penicillin. It was something they couldn't get in the area where they were. So we were. It was penicillin for intelligence. The intelligence he was going to capture where he was. There were lots of Soviet aircraft. There was lots of Soviet equipment. He had a reason to be in this area. We were worried about his equipment. So I made sure that everything that was metal that might glint in a desert sun, that we duct taped it with that black tape, everything, the cameras, everything on the saddles, everything he had, so he wouldn't be given away like that. Taught him how to photograph equipment and put something in the picture, like a piece of currency or a pack of cigarettes, so we could figure out the dimensions. We had a great week, and he relaxed.
You must have been quite a sight for people who were walking around Gravelly Point
Well,
next to
I
the
think we
airport.
were. I think people went back and said, Washington is so interesting. There was this woman, and she seemed to be the companion of this young man from I don't know, somewhere in the Middle East.
Of course.
Yeah,
So let's talk. We have about 9 minutes left or so. Talk more about disguises, because you use them for so many different purposes.
we did.
Maybe just tell our viewers what are some of those reasons when a disguise would be needed.
One good reason is deniability. And that's everything from sitting at an outdoor cafe with an asset and having your next door neighbor from Santa Fe walk by and go, "Hey, Jack," but you're not Jack that night. That night, maybe your name is Charles. Those kinds of casual recognitions that can just destroy a situation. We used disguise to allow us to blend in on the street wherever we were. We could, part of the disguise would be to dress down, dress like the local population, so you didn't stand out. It got interesting toward the end of my career when we were working against narcotics and terrorism. We were working against these two groups of people. They were not diplomats. We weren't going to parties at embassies. We were out on the streets with people who were very often from a criminal past, certainly in a criminal present, and they were armed. The cartels, there was so much money involved in the narcotics. They wouldn't think twice about shooting you. They really would not. They shot a lot of people. The money was just this pressure. And the terrorism, of course, very often you're looking at kind of religious fanatics, people that would do anything on behalf of the religion to further the belief. So with those two groups, our disguises became less of a nice to have, something you'd keep in your safe in the office in case you needed it, to a form of body armor where it would offer you protection, physical protection, being in Latin America and some of those countries and not looking like a gringo, being in disguise as a Latin American could save your life. And the same thing in various parts of the world, looking like you belonged there, not like you were a Westerner coming in, would keep you from getting hurt, kidnapped.
Share with us about it, and because now when you look in hindsight, it seems, well, this makes sense, how people were able to leave the embassy compound dressed as one of the housekeepers.
The babushkas.
Yeah, the babushkas.
Every morning there's a large group of often overweight older women would come to the gate and come in unmasked, but they had to show ID to get in, of course. We discovered
ID checked by the Russians then?
by the local guards that were on the street, because they were very careful who they let in, and then by our own Marine Guard security, they were also very careful. So coming in is not a problem, but going out, nobody checked anything. They kind of left in a group, like a herd, and you could very easily put someone in that group, and no one would notice. And so we could use that. Moscow was worst case scenario. Some of our most exotic operations, disguise wise, were to fool the Russians, and we had some amazing success there. We worked with some magic builders in LA, with some people who develop the unbelievable things we see on stage. You know, these incredible magic acts, and we got inside, and they explained to us how you build a deception, how you build an illusion. And then we went to Moscow and we built them on the streets.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up. Tell us about the bottles of water, the see-through bottles, and how that illusion worked, that you could hide a person in a stack of bottles.
That was out of the magic builders. It was how to move a person. What if think Afghanistan? What if a Russian wanted to defect and came into our embassy? and wanted to defect. That'd be great. But how would we get him out of the country? Because they'd set up a ring of armed people outside and not let us move him. How could we move him out of the embassy? And our magic builders came up with the idea of using a dolly, a hand truck. You see it in every warehouse, everywhere,
Sure.
every business, everywhere, to move everything from refrigerators to boxes of paper. The magician said, oh, what would be nice is a crate of water bottles, like 3 crates of water bottles. It'd be really heavy. So it looked like it was awkward. It would be awkward, but it wouldn't, it would look like a crate of water bottles. And you would expect that you're looking into clear water through clear, but you're not. So there's a person inside. And it would allow you to move somebody from the embassy into a van, into a truck, and drive off and begin exfiltrating them. Yeah.
That's a remarkable. So, you know, I know and believe that what we do is very good and the top of our game, but how are our major adversaries? How are the Russians and the Chinese, say, in comparison to our methods?
You're talking about disguise. You have to understand that no other foreign nation, when they come to the United States, have the problem that we had in Moscow. We don't follow them like the KGB follows us. The KGB in Moscow, it is a suffocating embrace they put around. They don't want you to work. They don't care if you see them. They just want to shut you down. Don't make contact with any of our citizens. When the Russians come here and to their embassy, we don't manage it that way. They don't need these exotic disguises nearly like we did. Not the exotic ones. They might use a mustache and a wig here and there, but they don't have full face masks. They don't go to the extreme measures that we went to. They don't need to. You don't do that unless you're forced to. But once you're forced to, it's interesting to see how good you can be at it.
And Beijing?
Beijing is hard. For us to be in Beijing was hard. I went out and did 2 weeks just doing nothing but looking like, what's here that we can use? How can we operate in this environment so crowded? But that wasn't the worst part. We are too tall. We are too pale. We are too blue-eyed and blonde-haired, kind of. The scenarios we developed out there, I don't know what they're doing today, but most of them involve, first of all, sitting down. A lot of our people, just you have to sit down. That might mean you're going to be working in a car, you're going to be on a bike, but you're not going to be towering over the masses of people, because we discovered in China, they don't follow you. They move you along through a static observation post. They have people in these buildings that they have convex and concave mirrors right outside their windows so they can see what's happening on the street. You see that in Italy, you see it other places. But they're just handing you off. So they have a little communication thumb. And they say, you know, when they see a foreigner going through their area, they call it out. They say he's heading north. The next person picks it up. And there's no one. You can look over your shoulder all you want. There's nobody following you, which is dangerous, because then you get comfortable.
So we have about another minute, and lots of students, I'm happy to say, watch WorldNow. Why should they consider a career at the CIA? Men, boys and girls, men and women.
It is a way to make a difference. It's an opportunity to do something that matters. It accommodates all kinds of people. Whatever your interests are, you can probably find a way to use it, whether you're technologically interested. We had physicists and chemists. We had engineers of every type. We had all kinds of technical people. We had linguists, people that were interested in languages. We had people who had traveled extensively and were curious about the world. No matter what you bring to it, if you like to write, if you're a thinking kind of person, there's our Directorate of Intelligence, our analysts, where they're putting together all the bits and pieces that we gather around the world, and they're finding patterns, and they're writing papers, and they're sending them on and up. It's a chance to really participate in the government. And like Tony used to say, every once in a while, if you're lucky, maybe once in a career, you kind of get to touch the wire. That's what he used to call it, where you just barely nudge something to the right or the left, and it had to do with your activities. It feels really good.
Well said. Jonna, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Keep writing your books. They're so good. And folks, we barely scratched the surface. There are lots of wonderful anecdotes and stories, and you'll feel very good about the work that CIA does after you read In True Face. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you next time on World Now.
Loved it. Thank you.